camera zooms in slowly on the courtroom. It's a place where every action is measured, every word weighed carefully. The judge enters, his robe flowing behind him. Everyone stands in respect as he takes his seat. A hush falls over the room. The defendant, sitting at the table, nervously shifts in his chair. His eyes dart around the room, scanning the faces of those around him. His hands tremble slightly, gripping the edge of the table. The prosecutor stands confidently, papers in hand, ready to present the case. But all eyes seem to be on the defendant. There's something about him. His nervousness is palpable, it's hard to ignore. His face is pale and his breathing seems shallow. The judge watches him closely, noticing every small movement. The air in the room feels tense, thick with unspoken thoughts. The courtroom waits in silence, unsure of what will happen next. As the case progresses, the defendant's unease grows more evident. His hands fidget constantly, and every few seconds he wipes his forehead with the back of his hand. He leans forward in his chair, then shifts back again. His eyes dart around the room, avoiding direct contact with anyone. His voice cracks when he speaks, and his answers to the questions seem hesitant, as though he's unsure of what to say. The prosecutor's words are sharp, accusing, and the defendant struggles to respond. His answers are short, often trailing off before he can finish his sentences. A bead of sweat forms on his temple, and he quickly brushes it away, but his discomfort doesn't go unnoticed. He keeps glancing at the judge, as if looking for reassurance or maybe even a way out. The judge, silent but observant, watches the defendant carefully. Every detail seems to be caught in the judge's gaze: the trembling hands, the uneven breathing, the nervous shifting. The prosecutor pushes forward, but it's clear the defendant isn't just worried about the case. Something else is at play here. The tension in the room is rising, and the judge is beginning to sense it. The judge watches the defendant for a moment longer, his eyes narrowing slightly. It's clear that something isn't right. The defendant's nervousness isn't just about the case. The judge leans forward, his hands resting on the bench, and quietly clears his throat. The courtroom is silent as the judge speaks. "Mr. Carter," he says, his voice calm but firm, "please step forward." The defendant freezes for a moment, his face pale. His legs shake as he slowly rises from his chair, his movements stiff and unsure. The room holds its breath, waiting to see what will happen next. The defendant takes small, hesitant steps toward the judge, his eyes downcast, avoiding the gaze of everyone in the room. When he reaches the bench, the judge looks at him closely. "Tell me, Mr. Carter." The judge continues, his tone softer now. "What's going on? You're shaking. You're not like the others here. What's troubling you?" The defendant stumbles over his words, his voice barely a whisper. I'm just nervous, Your Honor. I didn't expect." His voice fades and he shakes his head, unable to finish his sentence. The judge remains silent for a moment, watching him intently. The defendant looks up, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and confusion. The judge pauses, considering what to do next. The tension in the room is palpable. The judge sits back in his chair, watching the defendant closely. The silence is heavy, almost unbearable. The defendant stands there, trembling, not sure how to explain the fear and anxiety that have been eating away at him. The judge clears his throat, his gaze never leaving the man before him. "Mr. Carter," the judge says, his voice softer now, "I sense there's more to this. You're not just nervous about the case, are you?" The defendant hesitates. For a moment, his eyes flicker with something: fear, shame, maybe both. He opens his mouth to speak, but no words come out. His breath quickens, and his chest rises and falls as he tries to steady himself. The judge leans forward, watching carefully, sensing that the defendant is about to reveal something far deeper than anyone expected. Then, suddenly, it happens. The defendant's face crumbles. His eyes fill with tears and he sobs, unable to control himself any longer. The courtroom is completely still, the tension so thick that it feels as if time has stopped. "I've been carrying this secret for years," the defendant stammers through his sobs. "I'm guilty, but not of what you think. I did something terrible a long time ago, and I've never been able to tell anyone. I didn't know how to live with it anymore." The room remains silent. The judge watches, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding. He gestures for the defendant to sit back down, his face softening. There's a deep sense of empathy in the judge's eyes now. The courtroom, filled with strangers, feels strangely intimate in this moment. The judge looks at the defendant, his face a mix of concern and understanding. The courtroom is eerily quiet, the weight of the defendant's confession hanging in the air. The judge doesn't immediately respond, allowing the defendant a moment to gather himself. After a brief pause, the judge speaks. Mr. Carter, I want you to take a deep breath and tell me everything. We can't move forward until we understand what's really going on here. The defendant nods, wiping his tears away with the back of his hand. His voice is shaky, but he begins to speak again. It's not about the charges, Your Honor. It's something I've been running from for years. He hesitates for a moment, as though weighing how much to reveal. I've hurt someone I loved, and I never had the courage to make it right. That's why I can't breathe properly. That's why I can't think straight. Every day I carry this guilt, and it's eating me alive. The judge listens intently, his brow furrowed in thought. The courtroom, once filled with quiet whispers and shifting feet, is now completely still. No one knows where this conversation is headed, but it's clear that the defendant is finally opening up about something that has been buried deep inside him. The judge gestures to the court clerk, signaling for a brief recess. We'll take a short break, the judge says, his voice calm but firm. Mr. Carter, please remain where you are. We'll discuss this further. As the court takes a break, the defendant sits with his head bowed, clearly exhausted from the emotional release. The courtroom staff exchanges uneasy glances. No one expected this turn of events. The judge steps out of the room for a moment, speaking quietly with his colleagues. He's clearly processing what he's just heard. When the judge returns, the tension in the room is palpable. Everyone is waiting for the next step, unsure of what will happen now. The judge returns to the bench, his face composed but his mind clearly working through what he's just learned. The courtroom falls silent once again, all eyes on him as he takes his seat and clears his throat. The defendant, still seated, shifts nervously in his chair. His heart races as he waits for the next words to come from the judge. The judge leans forward slightly and looks out at the courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen, he begins, his voice steady and calm. We've heard a lot today. What started as a simple case has revealed a much deeper issue. Mr. Carter, you've admitted to carrying the weight of a past mistake, something that has clearly affected your ability to face the present moment. The defendant looks down, visibly relieved that the judge is acknowledging the truth he's been holding back for so long. The judge continues, his voice softening. While this court cannot overlook the seriousness of the charges you face, it is also important to recognize the human aspect of your situation. You are not just a defendant in this case, you are a person who has been struggling with guilt and pain that you've carried for years. The room listens intently, the air thick with anticipation. I've decided that instead of proceeding with the usual legal penalties, we will explore alternative options. I'm ordering you to undergo counseling and therapy to address the trauma and guilt you've been carrying for so long, the judge declares, his voice steady but filled with a quiet authority. The words hang in the air for a moment, and the defendant slowly lifts his gaze. His eyes are wide, and a flicker of something he hasn't felt in years, hope, shines through. The shock of the judge's decision is clear on his face, but so is the relief. His chest rises and falls with every breath, as if a weight he didn't realize was there has just been lifted. This court believes that you deserve a chance to heal, not just be punished, the judge continues, his tone softer now. He looks directly at the defendant, his words filled with empathy. I understand that the road ahead won't be easy, but you've shown a willingness to confront the truth. That alone is a significant step. The prosecutor, still processing the unexpected turn of events, shifts uncomfortably in their seat. Their eyes flicker nervously, not knowing how to react to such a compassionate ruling. They never anticipated the judge would make this kind of decision. But despite the discomfort, the judge stands firm, his gaze unwavering as he continues to speak. You will be given time to work on yourself, Mr. Carter. After a period of counseling, we will reassess your situation, the judge states, his voice calm but resolute. But right now, I believe this is the path that will bring about the most meaningful change for you. Healing isn't something that can be rushed, but this is your opportunity to begin the process. The defendant, overwhelmed by the kindness in the judge's words, can hardly believe what he's hearing. His face breaks into an expression of gratitude and disbelief. Slowly he stands, his legs weak from the emotional roller coaster he's just been through. He takes a deep breath, his voice trembling as he whispers, "Thank you, Your Honor." His words are filled with a relief so profound that it's as if he's just been given a second chance at life. As the courtroom begins to clear, an unexpected sense of calm settles over the room. The usual buzz of voices and hurried footsteps is replaced by a quiet stillness, almost as if time has slowed. The prosecutor, still processing the judge's decision, exchanges a brief glance with the judge. Their eyes meet for just a moment, a silent understanding passing between them. Neither speaks, both are taken aback by the unexpected turn of events. The weight of the situation lingers in the air, yet there is an unspoken recognition of the complexity of what just unfolded. The defendant, once trembling with fear, no longer seems as burdened. His shoulders, once hunched with anxiety, now appear slightly more relaxed. With each step he takes toward the door, there is a subtle shift in his posture, as if a weight has been lifted from him. His hands, which had been shaking just hours ago, are now steady, and his face, though still lined with emotion, carries a hint of relief. He walks out of the courtroom with a lighter step, no longer carrying the heavy burden of guilt and fear that had consumed him for so long. His future remains uncertain, and the road ahead may still be challenging. Yet, in this moment, for the first time in a long while, there is a flicker of hope in his heart. It's a fragile hope, but it's there, something he hasn't allowed himself to feel in years.